Hey, today I'm here with our Director of Development and Mentoring at Remax Signature, Amy Myers. Amy, say hi.
Hello, everyone.
Hey, great. So I'm glad to be here with her. Today, we're going to talk about the different types of contracts that you're going to see in the forms library, whether you're using Form Simplicity or Transaction Desk, or whatever their form system you're using. There's going to be three contracts that you're going to come across pretty regularly, or you could choose. So we're going to first identify the most common ones, and we'll talk about the differences in them, and then we'll kind of move on and break it down a little bit. So we're going to try to give you a quick summary of these different things. So the first thing we'll do is I'll go ahead and share my screen. And in my screen, you're going to see that we have this first contract, which is the FAR, Contract for Residential Sale and Purchase. Now, if I scroll through here, most of you will say, wow, this looks completely different than any contract that I've seen or come across. And that's probably the case because in our area, in the Daytona Beach Association of Realtors, this contract is very rarely used. In fact, if I've seen it once or twice in the 20 years that I've been doing real estate here, that would be a lot. So people don't usually come across it, but how you'll know you're using the wrong contract or the right contract is at the bottom of each page, it's going to give you the name of the contract and the revision date. So you see this has CRSP for Contract for Residential Sale and Purchase -16, and it was revised in February 20. So that'll let you know that you're using this FAR contract. And for our agents at our office, in our area here, we're going to recommend that you do not use this contract or accept this on your listings because it's going to be very different than the FAR bar contract. And let's just stick with the FAR bar contract, okay? So what we'll do then is we'll jump over and I'll show you this one, which is the Residential Contract for Sale and Purchase. But this has been approved by the Florida Association of Realtors and the Florida Bar, which is going to be the Attorney Association. So this is the contract that we recommend that you use and most commonly used contract. Well, this FAR bar contract is the most commonly used. However, this one is starting to be used again. It is a very good contract, but it's got a lot of differences from the most common contract that we're going to see. And the most common contract is which one, Amy, that the agents see out there the most?
The as-is.
The as-is contract, right? So many of you might not have even realized that there was not another contract other than the as-is. So I'll show you that real quick. That's how you can tell the difference right away. There's a big as-is at the top. So on this side, it doesn't say that. It's going to let you know you're in the standard contract. Now, the other way you'll be able to notice is when you scroll down to the bottom, you'll see it says Florida Realtors and Florida Bar as-is 5X. It'll have a revision date, and this is the revision date and contract that we recommend that you use. So it's going to have all of that information right here. That'll let you know that you're using the residential as-is contract. Now, this is the most popular contract used in our Daytona Beach Area Association. That doesn't mean it's the best for every situation. It's just the most commonly used contract. So if we scroll down, we'll see here in the inspection period, or inspection section, sorry about that, section 12, it's been modified. That's why this is in bold, and that's why there's a little asterisk here. Because when I come over to the standard contract, if I scroll down to that same section, you'll see that they're using these asterisks here to point out the differences and using the asterisks here to point out the difference, because these are basically the same contract with the exception of repair and inspection and maintenance, okay? So this one's pretty self-explanatory, right? I mean, this is the one we use. The buyer has the right to do the inspection. They can do any inspection they want. They have the right to cancel within a certain amount of days if they're not happy with the outcome of the inspection. Now, the funny thing is most people use this contract, and instead of the buyer canceling, what does the buyer typically do, Amy?
They ask for repairs.
They ask for repairs. Well, the funny thing is this contract does not mention how repairs will be handled, what repairs would be required, or time frames for them to be done, or even who does the repairs. So in this contract, it would be okay for the seller to do the repairs probably on their own instead of having a licensed person to do it. So if you know you're going to need stuff done on the house and you know repairs are going to come back, this may not be the best contract for you to use. You have to make that determination at the time. And you have to remember, this contract is designed for you to make an offer, and if you're not happy with it, the buyer can cancel it and walk away. Now, they can still ask for repairs, but that's where you're going to get a little loose. So here's the standard contract. And in this standard contract, there again, our revision and thing is FAR bar 5X, revision 619, 2017. we're going to notice that there's some differences right away. And in that first section, or section 9 closing cost, that's where some things are going to jump out at us. And there's 3 things there that are going to jump out and give us some, we're going to get some definition of what they mean. We're going to get some clarity on how it's supposed to be handled. So what are these 3 buckets? There's 3 buckets here, Amy. What are they? There's 3 of them that I have highlighted.
Yep, the first one is general repairs. Second one is WDO. And the third one is permit limits.
Okay, great. So see, in these buckets, it's gonna have general repairs. This would typically be from your general home inspection, where they'd go in and they'd look at the appliances and the AC and the structure and the roof and all of those things. So that would be where the majority of repairs are probably going to happen and come from. So you want to take that in consideration when you're either writing an offer, or if you are accepting an offer as a listing agent. You're going to want to take that stuff into consideration. The second one is the WDO treatment and repairs. And WDOs are commonly also called what, Amy?
Wood destroying organisms.
Wood destroying organisms, and also termite inspections. So sometimes people would just say it's a termite inspection, but really it's exactly what Amy said. It's a wood destroying organisms inspection. So if your owner has a bond, there's 2 different types of bond. There's a treatment bond and a repair bond. That could be covered in there, but it's going to be specific. Any money that's put in here is going to be very specific to WDO repairs and treatment. It's not going to fall under your general repairs. And then the last one's permit limits. And permit limits, that's going to be, if you have any open permits on the property. Now it could be open because maybe you were replacing the roof when you put the property on, up for sale. So it's open because actual work is being done, or maybe it's open because work was done months or years ago and that work wasn't closed out. And where that can become a concern is, did you know there was, or was there unpermitted work? That's the other thing that falls into here. So say somebody decided to add a bathroom onto their house, right? They just decide, hey, we're going to go ahead and add a bathroom. I'm a plumber. I'm a handy person. I can do the work. And they go ahead and add that bathroom themselves and don't pull the permit. That's where this becomes really potentially dangerous, because it's really hard for the county or the city, whoever's got to come do the inspection and issue the permit, for them to see what's behind the walls, how the plumbing was handled, how the electrical was handled. So that permit's going to be a lot more difficult and could be very, very, very costly. So if you know there was unpermitted work done on the house, be very, very careful on this and make sure you've disclosed everything that you know and everything's up front. Now, if there was a roof done, from one of the hurricanes, you paid a roofing contractor to come do it. And sometimes during those times where the hurricanes are done, for whatever reason, the admin with the county or the city, they don't always get closed out properly. So it's not easy to go online and see that they're closed out. So, but you know that the work was done by a contractor. You have the receipt that it was done by a contractor. You know that, this was done, or even that the city came out and did their final inspection. That's not going to be as big of a deal and should be relatively inexpensive to handle closing that out. But there could be some cost there. So you'll want to limit this one, I'd say. Use your own discretion. Every situation is going to be different, but I'd say if you limited that to $500 for per mount repairs, it's going to be pretty safe for the buyer and pretty fair for the seller as well. And we'll talk about how that's handled if it exceeds $500, or if it doesn't exceed $500, what do we do? How do we handle it? We're going to talk about that later. Same thing with the wood destroying organisms. If you have a treatment bond and it's a concrete block house, you could probably keep that relatively low. Or you could even let it go high because you're not too concerned about it. If the seller's maintained a bond and keeps their shrubs away from the side of the house and, everything's treated, there's a good chance that if there is termite damage, it's going to be a surprise to them. And that would potentially jeopardize any contract. And the seller may want to have be willing to repair even more of it. So take that into consideration as well, of what limits are going to be fair for your buyer as well as your seller when it comes to termites or wood destroying organisms. And the last one here, or the first one actually, is general repairs. This is the one where you have, depending on the condition of the house as you're going through, this one's going to have the most potential to stack things up. But the beauty is when we get a little further down the contract, it's going to define what's working condition and what's cosmetic condition. So it doesn't mean that just anything that the buyer wants to be fixed, such as a torn screen or a chip in the tile or something like that, doesn't mean that just anything like that has to be fixed. It's going to kind of define that a little bit more. And Amy, is there anything I missed there or anything you want to add in or questions that may come up from here?
Yeah, if I have a certain amount in there, so say I have $1,000 in repair for general repairs, and the repairs don't equal 1,000, and I have some money left over in that bucket, can that be moved down to my wood destroying organism repair?
Oh, great question. So, I mean, in the big picture, they could re-agree to do anything they want to, but that's not what the contract says. So yes, if you only spent 500 of the $1,000 in the general repairs and you needed 1,500 in the wood destroying organisms, do you have to apply that other $500 over here? No, because that's not what the contract says. It says that they're very separate and very specific. Now, if they want to re-agree to that, then you write a new addendum and they may agree to that, because in the seller's mind, they may say, well, I was already willing to spend X number of dollars. I'm willing to do it. But it's really totally up to the seller at that point. So that was a great question. The last thing I'd throw in there that when you said that made me think of something, and that is, what do we do if the repairs can't be done by time of closing? And this will be addressed right here, and it's going to be talking about escrow. So if the repairs or any maintenance items can't be finished by closing date, both the buyer and seller are already agreeing that they'll escrow up to 120% of that repair amount until the work is done. And then after the work is done, whatever that work cost will be paid out of that 125%. And if there's money left over, that'll go back to the seller. So they're already saying if we're on a time crunch here, and you'll see why in a minute we could end up on a time crunch. If we're on a time crunch here to get things done, that's already handled of how those repairs will be done after closing, and you don't need to really write a new addendum or address that. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to scroll down to the actual property inspection. So the property inspection, this is the major difference between the as-is contract and the standard contract. So the first thing here is it's going to say inspection period. Very similar. It's going to give you a 15-day default from the effective date to do it. But it does mention, that they have the right to do a general inspection or a WDO inspection and permit inspection. Okay. So it's going to mention those three inspections specifically. So it's not an inspection like, do I like the neighborhood? It's not an inspection, I don't like the neighbors? It's not an inspection of, you just don't like something. It's going to be very specific, and it's going to work in working condition or cosmetic condition. Whereas in this as-is contract, it doesn't say anything. It just says the buyer will do whatever inspections they want. And in their sole discretion, they can determine if the property is suitable for them and provide cancellation. So that puts a lot of power in the buyer's hands to be able to cancel for any reason they want. Mm-hmm. So then we'll dig into this a little bit further, and we'll talk about general inspections. Okay, so it says that the general inspections are going to be what the sellers could be required to repair. So Amy, is there anything that I should point out in here or any questions that you think are real important to hit for these general inspections?
I just think that there's a time frame. They just have to be really careful of some of the time frames and timelines within some of this.
You're exactly right. So the time frames are going to be very important, and so is who's going to do it. So look at this. This is pretty interesting here. It's going to also say the general inspection must be done by somebody who specializes and holds the right licensing. Whereas in the as-is contract, the seller could go do the inspections on their own. There's no requirement that it has to be a licensed inspector or general contractor or anybody that has the right licensing. Here, it does have to be either a general contractor or a professional inspector or a plumber. It has to be somebody that is licensed in that area and can provide a professional opinion. So once that professional opinion's done, that's going to start to identify what property conditions are. Okay, so what the condition of this and what we're going to do. So basically what the seller's saying is, look, I'm not aware of any leaks. I think everything's going to, or I've already disclosed them. I'm not aware of any of these things. I believe they're all in working condition, or I've already explained them to you. And then it's going to come down here and kind of describe what working condition means. So working condition means operating in the manner in which the item is designed to operate. Okay. Cosmetic condition means aesthetic imperfections that do not affect the working condition. So an example that I like to use to point that out is a roof. So, because it's pretty cut and dry and kind of clear here. So if the roof is an old roof, maybe 20, 25 years old, possibly even past its life expectancy, maybe there's even a couple curled or cracked shingles or some, fungus on the roof shingles there, but there's no leaks. Okay, that roof is keeping out all of the water from coming into the house and, pushing it away. What do you think, Amy? Is that going to be, it's an old roof, but, is that going to be something in working condition?
It is, because the roof is not leaking.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The roof is performing the function and what it was designed to do. It doesn't matter how old it is. Just like if you have an appliance, that appliance could be 75 years old, right? But if it's still turning on, the oven still works and everything's there, it doesn't matter that the dials are worn out, or it doesn't matter that there's scratches on it or chips out of it. That doesn't matter. As long as it's working condition, then it's working the way it's performed. And it goes on a little bit more here, and you can read this on your own. In fact, if you guys would like a copy of our highlighted contract here, you can just request a copy in the comments or email us, and we'll send you this copy of this highlighted thing. Now, the next part would be the general property repairs. So we get the inspection done with a licensed inspector. The buyer then gets all of the information back and says, hey, here are the things that I want to get repaired. Now that's really critical and that's often overlooked. Sometimes agents just send over a home inspection, right, Amy? And they just send over a whole home inspection. Well, yes. What does that mean if you're the seller and you get it, right? I mean, you want me to fix everything or is there only certain things? So you want to be very diligent as a buyer's agent and even as a listing agent to make sure that it's clear what the buyer is asking for and then also what bucket it's going to fall in. Does it fall in a general repair, WDO repair, or permitting repair? Because then the seller is going to have to go get estimates. And the seller has how many days here, Amy, to get estimates?
Within 10 days.
10 days of
the receipt of the buyer's inspection.
That's right, exactly. You have 10 days to do it. So now think of this. If we did a 30-day closing and we had a 15-day inspection because we left the default of 15 days, now we provide the seller with the list of things that we want fixed. And he has 10 days to get estimates. We're 25 days into the contract?
Yes.
Yeah, so we're 25 days into this contract on a 30-day closing. And, this could become a problem. There may need to be an extension or we may need to escrow for repairs. So that's where we just wanted you guys to really look at and realize that how these things can affect the timeframes and for you to really know and pay attention to the timeframes, okay? So it's really critical that you know what to do during these timeframes. Now, there is a chance that there could be a discrepancy. Maybe the seller says, no, that works fine. And the buyer says it doesn't because his home inspection doesn't. It's going to talk about here how you can get multiple inspections and what to do. I'm not going to get into that for time's sake today, but just know if there is a discrepancy, there is a resolution that's in here already. So the next point of these general repairs, and probably the most complicated part that I want to share with you and make sure that you understand some of these things, is going to be what happens if it exceeds the amount. So remember, we talked about maybe putting $1,000 in the general repair and $1,000 in the WDO repair and $500 in the permitting repair. Okay, what's going to happen is if this general repair item, they send over, 3 or 4 items, and it ends up, the seller gets estimates, and it ends up being $2,000. What are we going to do? Is the seller obligated to pay the $2,000? Does the buyer just have the right to cancel? What does that mean? Well, that's a great question because you see, the seller has the ability to agree to pay more. So if it came to $2,000 and the seller wants to fix it, they can fix it and there's no problem there whatsoever. But if the seller says, look, I only agreed to pay $1,000, which is probably what most sellers are going to say, right, Amy?
Yes.
Yeah, they're not usually wanting to pay extra, are they?
No.
So if the seller says, look, I only agreed to fix $1,000, there's $2,000 worth of stuff here. The seller has a requirement to have 5 days after getting his estimates to send back to the buyer and say, hey, which one of these things do you want to have repaired? Okay, so then the buyer has to send back to the seller saying, hey, please fix these things and I'll accept the rest in as-is condition. Okay, so this is where this contract helps a little bit with repairs because it allows the seller or buyer to really prioritize what's most important to them in that repair amount that the seller was willing to fix. So it leaves less up for arguing, less up for debate, and so on. So what will have to happen is the buyer provides the inspection to the seller. The seller then goes and gets, or not just the inspection, but the repair request. Make sure you're very clear on that, the repair request. Then the seller goes and gets estimates. The buyer could also get estimates if they want to, but since the seller is responsible to pay for the repairs, most likely the seller is going to want to get their own estimates. But it doesn't really matter who gets the estimates. After getting the estimates and deciding if it exceeds the amount that was agreed to, then we have the ability for the seller to request the buyer to pick what's most important. Now, here's a key thing here. If neither party delivers notice, this is really important. If the buyer never provides the seller with the things that are most important to him at the end of the inspection, or the seller gets the estimates provided to him and does not send back to the buyer, okay, which ones do you want repaired? Then either party can cancel the contract. That's what it says right here. And there's no date on that. So if there's no date or time frame, does that mean, Amy, they could cancel like 2 days before closing even?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's pretty dangerous, isn't it? I mean,
Yes.
wow. I mean, we're thinking, we've gone through all this and we're a couple days away from closing and we think we're moving in, and all of a sudden, neither party provided notice. Maybe the agent forgot, the buyers didn't realize, and now either party could cancel. So it is important that you address this stuff, you pay attention to these timelines, and you stay right on top of them. Now, that's basically how all three of these sections will work. So we won't spend too much time getting into the details of all of these things. We're just going to say that they all work very similar to this general property condition and repairs section. So same thing with wood destroying organisms. There's a time frame for this wood destroying organisms for the inspection to be done, for the request to be made by the buyer, for the seller to get the estimates, and then determine if it's above or below the repair limit, and then they're going to determine what they're going to do in the same exact way. So it's going to be very similar. It's just a different bucket of money, right, Amy? They're not combining the two. It's, hey, here are the repair things for the wood destroying organisms. The one thing that I want to point out there is that this is going to cover a couple things. It's going to list out what wood destroying organisms are, whether it's termites, beetles, plant life, and so on. And it's also going to list out damage created by wood destroying organisms, and then also the treatment. Okay, so you may have to replace some wood that destroyed it, and then you also may have to retreat. Okay, and then so anyway, that's how the wood destroying organisms work. Read this, look at the highlighted sections. Again, if you request in the comments here and you're interested, we can send you a copy of this highlighted contract, and you can kind of see some of those most important key parts. It's all very important, but we've just highlighted a few things. The last one is probably the one that's the newest addition to this. The wood destroying organisms and the general inspections, they've been around forever. But more recently, they added permits for open permits. Now, remember, if you did unpermitted work to a property, it could cost thousands and thousands of dollars to get it corrected. What if they did the work wrong, right? Have you ever heard of that, Amy? They put the wrong shingles on, or they didn't, there was something that they didn't use the right kind of drywall when they put the bathroom in. And so the inspector has to do a destructive test to see what that drywall is, and finds out that it's not water resistant drywall. Everything has to be ripped down and done again. So anytime there's unpermitted work, you got to really realize that this could be a huge obligation in this contract. So if that comes up, you need to know how to handle it. So that's why I say I would recommend definitely limiting this one. If you guys don't want to limit the other ones, that's fine. But you definitely want to limit this one, or if you know there's unpermitted work, start addressing and working on this early, okay? Or if there's things like on acreage, a lot of times on acreage, people have put up pole barns or fencing, or they might have done things like that they weren't supposed to and didn't pull permits. Mm-hmm. But sometimes the buyers don't care about that as much because, it's not affecting the actual house, and they're okay with it. Maybe address that in the contract after you read the disclosure and realize that there were unpermitted work there, and they're okay that it's an old shed, and they're fine with that. That could be okay. But if it is a concern, like a bathroom or a roof or windows or something like that, or electrical work or plumbing work, this could be very dangerous down the road. It could start fires, create floods, whatever. It's pretty important that it gets addressed and looked into. So what it says here under the permit inspection is that the inspector will do the inspection and find out where they don't see any closed permits or no permits were ever issued for something. And then it will be, then you have to find out the cost. Is it simply just paying the permit fee? If everything was done right, it'll only be a couple $100. Mm-hmm. You pay the permit fee, you pay the fine for not pulling the permit on time, and you're done. Or if your work was done by a licensed contractor and you have the receipt and maybe it just wasn't closed out right, then you pay the inspection fee for them to come close it out. It's simple, it's done, it's not going to cost much at all. So the real problem here is when things were not done properly, or to get it closed out, you got to involve a bunch of other people, which could take some time. So it's going to break down how all of this works and all of these time frames and so forth. It's basically the same as the other two. So I'm just going to say take some time to read into there and pay attention to that. It's going to be very similar, but the permits is the newest section of the contract. Amy, is there anything I missed in any one of these three, or anything you think I should bring back up? Or
Nope, I don't think so. I think it's going to be, time is definitely of the essence, and for everyone to keep their dates and timelines in order.
Hey, that's great. That's really important. And, you know, we do have in our office, we have a timelines checklist and a timelines calculator. So that's something also, if you're not using or you want to request, you can use, because these timelines are very, very important that you watch. And Amy hit the nail on the head there. She said, time is of the essence, right? Time is of the essence, meaning that if you have 5 days to do something, you can't do it on day 6, right? It had to be done by 5, or your party is in violation of the contract, which creates a whole nother problem. So if you can't get things done within that time frame, you got to do an extension, right? I mean, you got to request that written extension. And remember, an extension isn't guaranteed. If the other party doesn't want to give you the extension, then you have to deal within the terms of the contract and either cancel or move forward as it is. So the last thing that I want to throw on there as we get ready to end are going to be the repair standards. This is a section that's added into this standard contract. And these repair standards, they're going to basically say that it has to be repaired in a workman-like process, or it's got to be done in a workman-like manner, is the words that they actually use there. It's got to be a complete and a good workman-like manner by an appropriate licensed person in accordance with all the laws, okay, and with similar materials at the same quality that were already there. So if you had an old house that has all GE profile appliances, okay, and then, they were expensive appliances at the time, they can't just go in and throw in a $300 refrigerator, 19 cubic feet, bottom of the line refrigerator. They have to put something in that's comparable. It doesn't say it has to be brand new, but it has to be of comparable quality. It has to work. It has to meet those requirements. So you need to make sure that you pay attention to that. And that's really the main differences that you should be alerted to and aware of to make sure you understand if you're going to use this contract for a buyer or you're going to accept this contract as a seller. You're really going to want to spend some time there and point this out to the seller to make sure that they understand what they're getting into and their obligations. Because in this repair limit section, if we're looking at a $350,000 house, right? We're looking at a $350,000 house. Each one of these are going to be about 1.5% is going to be about $5,000. So if you pay no attention to this and let this go through, you're potentially putting the seller on the line for $15,000 of repairs, which is pretty substantial. And if they're not expecting that, they might not even have the equity to be able to do it. So you do need to address these, and you can put any number from as low as 0. It's okay to put 0. Hey, we're not willing to fix anything. Okay. Or 500, I'd recommend not going less than $500, but we'll pay $500. And the seller should think of this as an advantage to them. It's the last thing I want to say. In an as-is contract, the buyer is holding the ball. The ball is in the buyer's court and they're holding it and they have possession of it and they have control. So if they don't like something, they can just cancel it. And then what? The sellers had their property off the market for 2 weeks, the contract's canceled, and it doesn't matter that the seller was willing to make the repair or not, the buyer canceled the contract. In this contract, it's a little better for the seller and a little better for the buyer. And the reason I say a little better for both is because A, it's going to give the seller the control and the definition of what's working, what's cosmetic, and it's going to say, hey, I'll fix this. And if it costs more, the seller still has the ability to fix it and pay more. Now, on the flip side, it's better for the buyer because on an as-is contract, the seller's not obligated to fix anything. So the buyer could spend their inspection, they spent their time, it's the best house they want, and they ask for repairs and the seller just says no. And then the buyer's stuck with them. And it also helps the buyer because it's going to help define to the buyer the cosmetic versus the working condition, which will give them better clarity going into the inspection to know what to expect. So overall, I do think this is a better contract for most sales and for most properties that you'll deal with. However, I will say that there are a lot more time constraints in there. There's a lot more moving parts and there's a lot more requirements that as an agent, you're really going to need to be aware of, and you're going to need to help guide your buyer or seller through this process. Wouldn't you agree, Amy?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Well, I think that's it, for me. If there's not anything else that you think we should hit or add, I think we can go ahead and end this call for today.
Great. I think there's a lot of information here. We encourage everyone to print it, read it, understand it in case something comes up and they may need to be using it in the near future.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So, print these, ask for our highlighted copies, get with us or, one of the office managers if you have questions about it. Remember, we're not attorneys and we're not trying to give you legal advice on how the contract is, but we do want you to understand the basics of what it says and make sure that you understand these timeframes, because that's where you can really, really get in trouble, is by letting these timeframes expire or not understanding the definition of certain terms. So thank you guys for tuning in. Amy, thank you for suggesting to put this together. I think this was a great thing to kind of review and look over.
Thanks, Walter.
Thanks. Have a great day.
Bye.